Hello everyone. This story is called Mr. Mash and the Battle of Hot Dog High. It was a school day in Foodland, and Mr. Mash woke up in a very happy mood. He loved his job, being a teacher to his enormous class at Hot Dog High. However, the events of the day ahead were going to turn Mr. Mash's smile upside down. He arrived at the school to find somebody had parked in his parking spot. That left Mr. Mash feeling slightly annoyed. After parking his car in a space what felt like a mile away from the school, he walked up the steps towards the school gates. On the way up, two students barged into him, knocking his briefcase out of his hand. All of Mr. Mash's paperwork was scattered everywhere. Instead of apologising and helping Mr. Mash to pick up the papers, the two students ran off into the sports hall laughing. Now Mr. Mash was feeling very annoyed. Sausage and Beans saw that their teacher needed some help, so they gathered up the scattered paperwork and handed them back to Mr. Mash. "Thank you," he smiled. "Are you okay, sir?" asked Beans. "I've not had the best start to the day," replied Mr. Mash, who caught a glimpse of the two runaways running into the sports hall. "It can only get better," he said hopefully. When Mr. Mash reached his classroom, he was very surprised to see another teacher standing in front of his whiteboard. "Excuse me," he said, "what are you doing in my classroom?" "I am Madame Rosé. I am teaching this class today. You are no longer needed in here. Now take your briefcase and get out. Goodbye, Monsieur Mash." Poor Mr. Mash. What a rude, horrible bottle of wine. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that before. Mr. Mash is usually happy, smiley and calm. But today, he was none of these things. So he went to see Mr. Soup, the headmaster. Mr. Soup was in his office, swivelling around in his chair, looking unusually excited. "Good morning, Mr. Mash. Isn't it a beautiful day?" he said. "Not exactly," replied Mr. Mash sadly. "Who is Madame Rosé? And why is she teaching in my classroom?" he asked. "Ah, I see you've met her. Isn't she wonderful?" Mr. Soup was smitten with Madame Rosé. "She's come over from France to teach at Hot Dog High. It's all part of the exchange programme. You can take the day off. Take it as a reward for all your brilliant hard work," said Mr. Soup. "But I don't want a day off," sighed Mr. Mash. "I want to teach my students." "Ah, nonsense," smiled Mr. Soup. "Nope, it's settled. Take the day off. You deserve it." Poor Mr. Mash. He didn't want to go home. Walking through the corridor, he got bumped and knocked into a bin. He said, with his head stuck in the bin. Luckily, Sausage and Beans saw it all and helped their teacher out of the bin. Sir, what are you doing in the bin?" asked Sausage. "I got knocked over again. Did you see who did it?" "Yes," replied Beans. "There was two of them. One looked like a pair of frog's legs." "Did you say frog's legs?" stirred Mr. Mash. "They must be over here from France, along with their horrible teacher I met earlier. I think they must be up to something. Come on, let's see what they're up to." Trouble began in every single classroom they sat in. In Miss Cranberry's class, the two French students began making paper aeroplanes and loud noises, disrupting the class. Poor Miss Cranberry couldn't hear herself think. Sausage, Beans and Mr. Mash watched through the classroom window. "The first one is called Croissant, and the second one is called de Grenouille, which is frog's legs in English," said Mr. Mash. In the next class, they played a practical joke on Mr. Gherkin, the maths teacher. They filled a balloon with water and flour and placed it under the cushion on his chair. When Mr. Gherkin sat down at his desk, the balloon exploded, and it caused Mr. Gherkin to split his trousers. Oh dear. Finally, Mr. Tangerine found himself glued to a microscope during his science lesson. Croissant and de Grenouille had used super sticky glue. What a naughty pair. Lunchtime soon arrived. Everything was good until Madame Rosé and her French students walked into the school canteen. Pâté had brought along his pet snail, l'escargot. He took one look at the lunch menu and turned his nose up at it. "What is this disgusting menu? Sausage and chips? I don't like sausages," he snarled. At the back of the canteen, Sausage, Beans and Mr. Mash could hear everything. Sausage was angry. "Shh," whispered Mr. Mash. "Just listen." "I don't like the food. I don't like this school. The weather is always raining. Why is there no sun in this country? Take me back to France." Madame Rosé agreed. She didn't like her English students. "I don't like teaching in this establishment. That pompous round bowl of soup is about as useful as a chocolate teapot," she thundered. Poor Mr. Soup. He had heard everything too. Excuse me? You just called me a chocolate teapot. Mr. Soup was fired up. Nobody calls me a chocolate teapot in my school. Now take that. And he threw a custard pie at Madame Rosé. Splat. Everyone in the canteen gasped. Food fight! Shouted Sausage, and so it began. Fruits and vegetables were being chucked across the canteen. Pies, pizzas, chips and peas, sweet corn milkshakes, curry and beans. Eventually, the food fight had to stop. Enough now! Shouted Mr. Mash. Everyone stopped. He went over to Madame Rosé and her students. You are the most rudest and most ungrateful teacher I've ever met. As for your students, they have caused nothing but trouble ever since you stepped inside this school, he said. Mr. Soup is an excellent headmaster, and we are very proud of every one of our students here at Hot Dog High. We like our food, and yes, it occasionally rains, but we like that too. You are no longer wanted here. Take your students with you. And that snail, and kindly get out of our school. Mr. Baguette arrived and took Madame Rosé and the French students back to France. Meanwhile, back at Hot Dog High, all the students were cheering and celebrating Mr. Mash. I'm very sorry, said Mr. Soup. I should have never given you the day off. Would you like to come back to work? I think the students would very much like it if you did. Of course, smiled Mr. Mash proudly. 3 cheers for Mr. Mash, said Mr. Soup, the greatest teacher in Foodland. Just look at the smile. It was back. Mr. Mash felt very proud. So what's my next lesson? He asked Mr. Soup. I believe it's French, he replied. Ha ha! And that is the end of the story. Hope you enjoyed it. See you again next time.